Heading home, Team GB fly out of Rio tonight as they celebrate their most successful games in more than a century. After 19 days of competition, a spectacular closing ceremony to mark the end of Rio 2016. And a place in the history books for Team GB's athletes, who will bring home 67 medals, more than they won in London.
Fly home with medals in our pockets that make us the most successful team ever.
But away from the Games, the city's violence has continued. We'll be asking what Rio's legacy will be. Also on the programme tonight, trying to stop the spread of extremism in jails, the government announces plans for England and Wales to segregate the most dangerous Islamist prisoners. United we stand. The leaders of France, Germany and Italy take to a warship to say the European Union can't be sunk by Brexit.
Thank you very much.
Labour's leadership contest gets underway in earnest as almost 650,000 ballot papers are sent out to party members. And the race for the energy source critics call extreme oil. We have a special report from Canada.
In the south, a community remembers 1 year on from the Shoreham air crash in which 11 men died. And a desperate measure, the girl in so much pain she chose to have her leg amputated.
Good evening. Team GB will fly home tonight on board flight BA 2016, a British Airways plane with a golden nose after their most successful Olympic Games since 1908. They finished in second place behind the United States with 67 medals, beating their London 2012 medal haul. Following their sporting success, Downing Street has confirmed there will be no formal cap on the number of athletes and coaches who can be recognised in the New Year's honours. The Rio Games came to a spectacular close last night as Brazil handed over the baton to the next hosts, Tokyo. From Rio, here's our sports editor, Dan Roan.
Rio certainly went out with a bang. Its farewell to the Olympics as spectacular as the sport which preceded it. Team GB lit up these games, turning up for last night's colourful closing ceremony in red, white and blue flashing shoes. They'd earned the right to party after their best Olympics for more than a century. This evening, leaving here having exceeded all expectations.
To be able to fly home with medals in our pockets that make us the most successful team ever, it's just something that we couldn't have predicted on the way out. When we flew out, we had hoped it, dreamed it, but the fact that it's happened, I think, is amazing for everyone.
Team GB surpassed their record-breaking performance at London 2012. The first of their remarkable haul of 67 medals was won by Adam Peaty, and the swimmer says they can do even better in Tokyo in 4 years' time.
The swimming team now is very young, so we're only going to get stronger than this, and now I'm going to work hard and ever to make sure that we can carry the momentum just as well as we've done now.
This evening, members of Team GB were in high spirits at Rio Airport as they prepared to fly home. As in 2012, they'll return to a hero's welcome. They received congratulations today from the Queen, and many athletes are thought to be in line for honours in recognition of their achievements. The man who led the team here in Rio told me that Tokyo would be tougher still.
You'll have a much stronger Japanese team on home turf compared to Brazil across more sports. You'll have China, for various reasons, political reasons, wanting to do really well on their doorstep in Japan. So we know they'll be strong, and this squad here is probably a developmental team going through to that. You'll have a resurgent Australia, they won't sort of roll over now. And you'll have a full Russian delegation there. So that I think the competitive landscape will be a lot tougher, but we've certainly got the talent there.
Rio officially handed over to Tokyo last night. Japan's Prime Minister making a surprise appearance disguised as popular video game character Super Mario. For British sport, the task of achieving another glorious Games begins now. Dan Roan, BBC News, Rio.
The swimwear firm Speedo USA has ended its sponsorship deal with the American swimming star Ryan Lochte after the athlete lied about being robbed at gunpoint during a drunken night out in Rio. Lochte has made several apologies, but 3 companies have now ended their sponsorship agreements with him. Speedo said it could not condone the swimmer's actions and will instead donate part of his fee to charity. Well, Rio 2016 ended, but the Games were certainly not without their problems, played out against a backdrop of huge economic turmoil, political unrest, as well as anger from many at the amount of money spent on them. And the big question, as always with the Olympics, what will their legacy be for the host country? Our Brazil correspondent Wira Davis reports.
As Rio said goodbye to the Olympics, a moment to take it all in. For the last 2 weeks, the city has put its many problems to one side, but they're problems and divisions that can't simply be discarded and forgotten about.
Being Olympic champion in your home country.
The power of sport as a force for change was typified by Rafaela Silva, Brazil's first gold of the Games, a woman from one of Rio's toughest neighbourhoods who was embraced by the entire nation, amazed by her own achievement and optimistic about what it meant.
If
my medal can help persuade people that the Games are good for Brazil, they are not a waste of money and they have improved the image of the country, that's a good thing.
Rio certainly felt like a more confident, safer place during the Olympics. But this is what it took to guarantee the security of tourists and athletes. There have been almost unprecedented levels of security for the duration of the Games. Literally thousands of heavily armed soldiers on the streets. And while they've kept many parts of Rio safe for the last 2 weeks, elsewhere things have continued just as normal. Almost every day before and during the Games, there were heavy shootouts between police and the gangs that control many of Rio's favelas. It was particularly bad here in the Complexo do Alemão, a sprawling community within sight of the Olympic Stadium. A community almost untouched by the Games.
For us, they may as well have taken place in London or Beijing. The Olympics haven't done anything, and we didn't feel part of it. We didn't see any investment or any improvement in the community.
But the Olympics did serve as a catalyst to transform some parts of Rio. New infrastructure and previously no-go areas revitalised, already being used by thousands of locals.
Brazil and Rio in particular bet on this cycle of mega events as a way of pushing forward a certain model of development, a certain model of urban transformation. And it did transform the city, indeed. I don't think it benefited the majority of the population.
There are challenges ahead, not least the forthcoming Paralympics. City and state coffers are almost bare, but the so-called marvellous city can breathe a sigh of relief. Wira Davis, BBC News, Rio.
Well, let's go back to Dan Roan in Rio. And Dan, staging the Olympics was by no means easy for Brazil at times. What impact will their experience have on the Olympic movement?
Well, I think if you'd told organisers at the IOC and locally, Sophie, 3 weeks ago how Rio 2016 would pass off, they would certainly have accepted that. They'd have settled for it. I think in the immediate term, the Olympic movement will be feeling great relief, as Wira said in his report. After all, when you consider these were the first Games to be staged in South America, they took place in a country going through political upheaval, economic recession. There was concerns over security, over Zika, over pollution. Given all that, there's a sense that Rio really got away with it. It could have been a great deal worse than it was. Having said all that, there were difficulties, of course, unforeseen costs which have impacted on the Paralympics, which begin here in around 2 weeks' time. They've had to be pared back. There were trouble with security, empty seats as well. And I think because of all that, Rio could be a watershed moment. It'll force the IOC to consider whether or not the Games going forward have to be cheaper, smaller, less of a burden, certainly when it comes to places like this. There's no sign of that. After all, 5 new sports have just been added to the programme for Tokyo 2020. But maybe the IOC will have to decide whether or not it wants to be a little less ambitious, go to places which represent less of a risk. I think also, given the great doping scandal that dominated the build-up to these Games, the IOC have to try and work out how to restore some faith and trust in the integrity of their sports. But despite all of those concerns going forward and the questions the IOC have to grapple with, one thing's certain, for millions of people watching around the world on television, Rio 2016 will always be associated with a spectacular backdrop and captivating sport, and it'll be particularly fondly remembered back in Britain, of course.
Dan Roan in Rio, thank you. The Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, says measures to tackle the growing threat of Islamist extremism in jails in England and Wales are an absolute priority. The government has announced plans to segregate what it calls the most dangerous Islamist prisoners from other inmates in a bid to stop the spread of extremism. But prison reformers say there should also be a focus on safeguarding vulnerable inmates at risk of being radicalised. Daniel Sanford reports.
Among the most infamous Islamist extremists now incarcerated in Britain are Anjem Choudary, found guilty last month of supporting so-called Islamic State, Abdullah Ahmed Ali, who led a failed al-Qaeda plot to blow up multiple passenger jets over the Atlantic, and the 21st of July bombers who tried to attack London 2 weeks after 7/7. They're just a few of the men who could spread their ideology in prison. We know it happens. Men who converted in jail include Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, and Nathan Cuffey, who unknowingly supplied the gun for a failed Islamic State attack in London. The new Justice Secretary told me it was now time to keep the worst extremists away from other inmates.
There is a risk there of those highly subversive individuals being able to collaborate with each other. That's why we're talking about a number of small units rather than a single larger unit, which has been tried in the past and where there have been significant problems.
The idea is to create a set of prisons within prisons, special units inside high security jails like Belmarsh, where a few of the worst extremists can be kept completely isolated from the rest of the prison population. Jamal, not his real name, spent 2 years in prisons, including Belmarsh, where he saw young, violent criminals and drug dealers being quickly radicalised by a hard core of 20 extremists.
There is an Islamic movement in prison, and it's not an Islamic movement based upon the beautiful virtues of Islam. No, it's an Islamic movement based upon bullying, and based upon protection, and based upon violence.
But Dal Babu, previously a senior London police officer and a Muslim, warns that special units for extremists are a risky solution.
Well, the danger is if you put people into one unit, they become martyrs. It's a badge of honour. The danger is that these individuals then want to become the individuals that others might inspire to. So it's very, very dangerous that we have these individuals there. Prisons are full of vulnerable people, and we want to try and ensure that those vulnerable people do not get seduced by these individuals.
Beyond the proposed special units, all prison staff will now get further counter-extremism training too. But there are no plans to set up special units in Scottish prisons, where Islamist extremism is not seen as a major problem. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
A brief look at some of the day's other news stories now, and the former Radio 1 DJ Chris Denning has pleaded guilty to a series of child sex offences dating back as far as 1969. The 75-year-old, who was one of the original lineup of presenters, admitted abusing 11 boys but denied 3 charges of indecent assault. He'll be sentenced next month. The go-ahead has been given for a £7 million research project in the UK to try and help identify Alzheimer's disease at an earlier stage. It's thought that the brain changes for several years before the more obvious signs of the disease become apparent. A salvage team hopes to refloat the stranded oil rig Transocean Winner tonight. It's been 2 weeks since the huge structure ran aground off the Isle of Lewis in Scotland. 2 tugs will try to tow it clear, but the success of the operation may depend on how much damage the rig has sustained below the water. The leaders of Germany, France and Italy have stressed the European Union will prosper in spite of the Brexit vote. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the French President François Hollande and the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi travelled first to an island off the coast of Naples. Our correspondent James Reynolds reports.
This continent's most powerful leaders may be losing the UK, but they want to show that the idea of a united Europe is as strong as ever. Matteo Renzi, Angela Merkel and François Hollande flew to the remote island of Ventotene. It's Italy's version of Alcatraz. This is where the idea of a united Europe was born.
Many people felt that after Brexit, Europe would come to an end. That's not the case. We respect the choice that's been made by the British people, but at the same time, we want to be able to write a page for the future.
The trip has set off reflection in others. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, calls the creation of borders the worst invention politicians have ever made. For the three leaders, this trip to the island is a kind of pilgrimage. It's their way of rediscovering and rededicating themselves to the idea of a united Europe. Britain may be leaving, but these countries want to show that they are staying put. There was even a subliminal message for anyone who doubts them.
We ourselves have to commit, and that's by committing more that we will be able to take Europe towards a future of unity and cohesion.
Point made. The three will join the rest of Europe's leaders next month in Bratislava to discuss what the Union might look like without the UK. James Reynolds, BBC News, off the coast of Ventotene.
The German government is advising its citizens to stockpile food and water for use in a national emergency. They're being advised to store enough food to last them 10 days. Germany has been on a state of alert after a series of deadly attacks. Well, Jenny Hill is in Berlin for us, and this all sounds very radical, Jenny.
It does. In effect, Sophie, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, German citizens are being told to prepare themselves for the worst. On Wednesday, Angela Merkel and her cabinet are expected to rubber stamp a new civil emergency plan, and that plan is expected to contain the recommendation that households should ensure they have adequate water supplies and enough food to last them for 10 days in the event of some kind of national emergency. It's not yet been published, but already it's causing huge controversy here in Germany, with opposition MPs accusing the government of scaremongering. The government, for their part, say this plan has been a long time coming. They've been looking at this for a number of years. Nevertheless, of course, its emergence now couldn't have come at a more sensitive time. It's a month or so since what are thought to have been the first IS terror attacks here on German soil. Domestic security is dominating unofficial campaigning ahead of next year's general election. This country feels jittery, and Angela Merkel has a huge task ahead of her to persuade German citizens that she can keep it safe.
Jenny Hill, thank you. Turkey has launched artillery strikes on Kurdish fighters and Islamic State militants in northern Syria after it vowed to fight so-called Islamic State and cleanse the group from its borders. It comes after the suicide bombing during a wedding party in the south of the country, close to the border with Syria. Officials have now confirmed that 54 people died. 22 of them were children. Our Turkey correspondent Mark Lowen reports.
They waited in turn to pay tribute as their community tries in vain to return to normality. But the horror can't be erased of a suicide bomber who struck here on Saturday, killing more than 50. The force of the blast is still clear, and so too the remnants of the bomb, fertilizer explosive, designed to maim and cause terror. The target, the wedding party of Besna Sinur and Nurettin Akdoğan, a celebration ripped apart. It's a neighborhood of Gaziantep that once felt safe, where children play freely and rarely thought of danger. 22 of the victims were under 14. The youngest was just 4. All those here have lost somebody, friends or relatives. Grief unites them, and it will forever mark Veysel Kalay, whose 16-year-old son Murat was killed. He recalls the aftermath, details scarring his youngest.
I went through all the bodies and then I found my son. His body was in pieces. As I moved him, his phone rang. It was his brother. Then I fainted and woke up in hospital. May God spare everyone from such pain and curse those who did this.
The signs point to so-called Islamic State. The government says it's unsure if the bomber was an adult or a child. Yet again, Turks are asking why terror keeps striking here. The answer is 5 years of Syria's war that has fostered IS, replaced childhood innocence with murder, in which life has almost lost its value, so often is it taken. It's not only destroying Syria, but has also dragged Turkey into a conflict seemingly without an end. And it's accelerating. These are said to be Syrian rebel fighters now in Turkey. They're here preparing an imminent offensive against the IS-held province of Jarablus. Turkey is backing it to drive IS and its own enemy, the Syrian Kurds, back from the border. We met one of the rebels waiting for the green light. He tells me the 1,500 fighters will be given Turkish artillery support as they target Jarablus. The Kurds wanted to attack there too, he says, but we will stop them and IS. We're ready to die for this, to give our people their homes back. But in Turkey, they're dying too, victims of the war across their border that's reduced lives to numbers and left this country asking when will it feel safe again. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Gaziantep.
The first of around 650,000 ballot papers have been sent out today to people who can vote in the Labour leadership contest. Party members will get a say along with those belonging to unions and almost 130,000 registered supporters. Our political correspondent Vicky Young's report contains some flashing images.
He's getting backing from some senior Labour figures, but Owen Smith needs to persuade hundreds of thousands of signed-up supporters that he'd do a better job than Jeremy Corbyn. So today he made a bold promise to put them in charge of party policy. And he did all he could to distance himself from the years when Tony Blair took New Labour into power.
The leadership of our party then was more interested in good relations with the bankers, a big business and the media than we're staying in touch with our grassroots.
And he said the era when Labour members were seen and not heard must end.
I will bind myself to the decisions made by conference on party policy. I will not seek to overturn it, whatever my views, but I will seek to influence it as leader.
This evening, Jeremy Corbyn joined a team of campaigners in South London, drumming up support.
Our party, 500,000 members and rising, is part of the community in every part of this country. And being part of the community in every part of this country means that we fight lots of local campaigns, and every time you win a local campaign on anything, everybody is stronger.
They say he's inspiring people to join the party all over the UK, and they're confident he'll still be leading Labour at the end of this contest.
Thanks, guys. OK, thanks.
Labour Party membership is now at its highest since 1979. When Tony Blair won his landslide victory, membership was just over 400,000. That nearly halved after the Iraq War in 2003. And the slump continued until Ed Miliband took over in 2010. But the biggest rise has come under Jeremy Corbyn. Now there are more than 500,000 full members. After rows about the rules, not all those new members can vote in this contest. Other supporters and trades unionists can. So 2/3 of a million people will elect the new Labour leader. The recent surge in those signing up to support Labour has been remarkable, and the party now has more members than any other political party in the UK. But this leadership contest has come about because of deep divisions over the direction the party should go in next. Bringing those two sides together will not be easy. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Hundreds of people have observed a minute's silence at Shoreham in West Sussex to mark the first anniversary of a crash at an air show which killed 11 people. A vintage jet came down on a main road outside the show when a manoeuvre went wrong. An air accident report is not expected to be published before the autumn. There's been heavy rain in the Yorkshire Dales, flooding one of the longest cave chambers in Britain. The manager at the White Scar Cave said he's not seen such bad conditions for 30 years. A number of roads in North Yorkshire have also been flooded. The first Islamist militant to be brought before the International Criminal Court in The Hague has pleaded guilty to destroying cultural sites. Ahmed Al-Faki Al-Mahdi admitted leading rebel forces who demolished mausoleums in Timbuktu in Mali in 2012. The rise in Islamic extremism has led to the destruction of many irreplaceable cultural monuments in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq and Libya, as well as in Mali. Our World Affairs editor John Simpson reports.
The glamorous-sounding city of Timbuktu was once a centre of culture rivaling medieval Europe, its buildings and shrines among the glories of Africa. Then in 2012, Al-Qaeda captured it with the help of locals. This was the result.
The court will now proceed.
Now, though, there's a reckoning. Ahmad al-Mahdi, the man in charge of the destruction, admitted his guilt today. And he advised Muslims everywhere not to get involved in the kind of thing he had done because it harmed humanity in general.
You understand that the crime you are admitting guilt to can carry a maximum term of 30 years.
There's a pattern to this. Back in 2001, the Taliban, who were then ruling Afghanistan, blew up the huge statues of Buddha at Bamiyan, 1,500 years of history gone. Afghanistan was a kind of black hole where the most extreme versions of Islam could take charge. By destroying cultural monuments which the world reveres, the extremists demonstrate how ferocious they're capable of being. This is Palmyra in Syria, controlled till last May by the so-called Islamic State. Then the Russians chased them out. And in the arena where IS executed prisoners, a Russian orchestra played.
If it weren't for the Russians, this beautiful place would still be under the control of Islamic State, and they might well be using it for their atrocities still.
Extremism has done terrible cultural damage. In Iraq, when IS volunteers stormed the museum in Mosul in 2014, they smashed everything they believed was idolatrous. Now, though, IS is being pushed back everywhere. Timbuktu is free of extremism as well now. In court today, the prosecutor in the case explained why these cultural things matter.
They are relics of a great chapter in humankind's intellectual and spiritual development on the continent, which gave Timbuktu its standing in the world.
And now, at last, Timbuktu can rebuild and replace what it's lost. John Simpson, BBC News.
It's one of the biggest energy projects in the world. In Canada, around 2 million barrels of oil are being produced every day from what are called tar sand deposits beneath the state of Alberta. They stretch over a vast area the size of Greece. Canada is determined to extract as much oil as it can from beneath the wilderness, but the extraction process produces huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, and environmentalists say such plans fly in the face of Canada's environmental commitments. From Alberta, Stephen Saka has this report.
In the remote north of Alberta is a land of bears, caribou, moose and oil men.
We're kind of in the southern end of the Athabasca oil sand deposit, and we're heading to our Christina Lake facility.
This is what a state-of-the-art tar sands oil field looks like. 400 meters down is a rich seam of thick bitumen oil. It has to be liquefied by steam. It is high-energy, high-emissions oil production. Critics call it extreme oil, but Canada is determined to tap it.
If we look out in the next number of decades, oil is still going to be needed as part of the energy mix. We're still going to need renewables. We're going to need all forms of energy.
Fort McMurray is Canada's tar sands boomtown. But in May, whole neighborhoods were incinerated in a ferocious wildfire they called the Beast. This is what the Beast left behind. Hannah Friedhead used to live in a neat two-bedroom house.
Welcome to my home.
A very strange pleasure to be here. The Fort McMurray fire fueled a fierce argument. Is man-made climate change making natural disasters like wildfires more frequent, more severe? And if it is, will Canada turn its back on its vast tar sands reserves?
Get real. They can't walk away
from this massive potential resource of oil sands?
It's not just Greenpeace that is saying this. It's, organizations like the International Energy Agency that are saying 3/4 of all remaining fossil fuel reserves need to remain in the ground.
Climate change will test our intelligence, our compassion, and our will.
Canada has a new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He went to the UN to sign the Paris Climate Accord. Canada is now committed to cutting greenhouse gas emissions 30% by 2030. But big oil brings Canada big money. You see it in Calgary, where the oil companies have their offices. Canada's politicians won't halt the tar sands oil rush, even if it means allowing the industry to increase its emissions by almost half.
In this, sort of short to medium term, 20% of Canadian GDP relies on Alberta's oil and gas industry.
That's the key phrase, though, isn't it? Short
small.
term. Do you worry that here in Alberta you are a part of a problem which is going to cost Canada dear in terms of international reputation?
I think what we're doing in Alberta is we've taken the first steps on the continent and in the industrialized world to recognize that we have a problem and to take action on it. We are leaders in that way, and I will make no apologies for it.
Canada doesn't want to be seen as one of the world's polluting powers, but if it insists on pumping out every drop of tar sands oil, it's a label which might just stick. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Alberta.
And you can see more on Canada's search for oil on Hard Talk on the BBC News channel tomorrow evening at 8:30. Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two. Here's Kirsty.
Tonight, the Labour leadership ballot papers are out. Does the mainstream media give Jeremy Corbyn a fair crack at the whip or a whipping? And conversation with the legendary performer and producer Quincy Jones. Join me now on BBC Two.
Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.